he says start off as a sort of a datum point. You start off at 19 mil below. Let's see if I can bring it back up. Here we go. That's basically what the guy has said. I can reproduce what he put. Start with adjusting the height to 19 mil, and as you can see, he's going from the main jet casting, so not the top of the main jet, but the main jet casting, and then down onto the top of the very top of the float. So that's without pressing the spring. You mustn't depress the spring, so you let the float sit at its natural position on the spring. If your springs are a little bit worn in your needle jets, you will have to incline the carb slightly so that it sits where it first meets the spring, rather than tipping it all the way up so the weight of the float ends up pushing the spring in. So if you've got that right, that's a good place to start. That's what I've done, is I've set both the float heights at 19 mil, and then he also shows there the tube, and they say that it can be dead level or plus 1 mil. So this is the carbs apart. I've put that one back together. I've already done that one and put it back together. But what the chap on the internet is showing is basically you've got to incline the carburetors like that, and the float needle. Well, first of all, I'll just quickly tell you how to get the float needle out. You hang on, put my glasses on so I can see something. If you look, you'll see that this side, the pin through the float, has a large head on it like a nail, and on this side it's smaller. So what you basically have to do is you have to put this side down. What I always use is a punch for making holes in gaskets. I put it in the vise, and then I make sure that it's big enough, that the hole is big enough to push this pin through, the head of the pin through, and then put it down on the hole punch, and then using a needle punch, or you can use a small torque screwdriver or something like that, or a screwdriver for doing glasses, for repairing glasses, and knock the pin out. And it'll probably be quite stiff, but you'll knock it out, and once you've knocked it out a certain distance, you'll be able to pull it out with your fingers. And basically what you do is I've changed the needle jets, which basically the new needle jets, especially because they're, generally speaking, they're aftermarket ones, they're never going to be exactly the same machining. Exactly, they're not going to be engineered the same way as the original ones were. So you're going to end up having to set your float height without a doubt. And on this particular carbs, normally you would just have a set value that you would have to set the carburetors to, the floats to, in millimeters. And what you would do is incline the carb like that so that the float comes all the way out like that, and then you gently turn it back until it just goes down. You don't turn it all the way over, because if you turn it all the way over, it will add a little bit of pressure to the spring, and what you're basically gapping it at is the distance with it just touching the spring pin, not depressing the spring. So what I've done here is I've set my, as per the instructions the fella on the internet showed, I've set my micrometer to 19 mil, and then you just turn it round, and what you do is you put it to there like that, and then get it level, and that is needs to go down a little bit more. So the way you get it to go down, and you've got to be so careful with this because it moves so much with so little force, is hold the floats, hold both of them so that they don't end up twisting, and then just lift that little plate very, very slightly, and then start again. Bring them down and incline them back so that they're on the spring. Try to do it evenly from both sides, but bear in mind that it does move an awful lot with very, very little movement. That's about bang on. Right, it's bang on. Okay, so I can put these carbs back together now and then move on to the next stage, which is testing them with clear plastic tubes to see the level of the fuel. Is what you basically do is you see these drain plugs here, these drain holes. You put clear plastic tube on that and wrap the tube back up round so that you can see it, so you can see the level in it. And then what basically happens is the carburetors, you fill the carburetors up with petrol from the petrol pipes, and what will happen is the level in the float will match the level of the clear plastic tube. And on these carburetors it's supposed to be right to the flange here. The level is supposed to be right to the flange, which that feels really high to me, but it is what it is, and that's what we're going to set it at. There's under normal circumstances there's enough room in the float chamber for the floats to go all the way up and actually compress the pin itself, but on these it's actually reaching the top of the carburetor before it's gone past the spring. But it's the way they are, and that's how they're supposed to be set. So if you don't do that, they will be you'll be wanting when you're on full throttle. It will be hunting because it won't be getting enough fuel. So, but it's borderline. It's right on the borderline at which these carbs would start to overflow. So it's got to be just right. What I've done anyway is I've followed the instructions and set up some clear pipe from the drain pipe. I've set up a fuel cell up there, and what I've discovered, which nobody else said, so I'll take you back out to the carbs I'm doing, and this is using I've put new seats, new needle jets and new needle valves. But if you have a look, you'll see he's still needs to go, it's not quite right, still needs to go a little bit higher. But the one thing I want to point out, which I found following the instructions, is you cannot set the float height unless you put an O-ring on these drain screws, because what will happen is the fuel will leak out and it'll just keep pulling in more fuel, and you'll get air in it, and it's not giving you a true value. That is now what was happening before. When air was getting in, was the level was just coming up and up and up, because it was basically keeping on coming in because the fuel was basically letting air in all the time. So the needle jet was staying open because it didn't have a positive force of fuel to shut it. But you can see where the level is now. I'll point out where the level is. The level is right there. So that's a good 3 mil below. So what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to change the needle jets, the needle valves. I think I'm going to change the needle valves now for some softer needle valves, because I think my needle valves, they'd probably be fine at about that setting, because they're a little bit too stiff, because they're actually ones for a Suzuki Intruder. But I'm going to change them. I've got some with slacker springs, and I'm going to change them and put those in, because I think I'll be able to get a better float height. But that's just to show you that this is one thing, like I say, I didn't see anyone saying on the internet, was to put O-rings on these, because if you don't, you'll just get fuel coming out, air going in, and the readings will be all over the place. So you can see that's been sitting there now for, just zoom in on it, that level's been sitting there now for 10 minutes and it hasn't changed. So I know that that's correct, but it does need, the float height needs to be altered. It needs, the float needs to go deeper.
So I've put the floats back on, I've cleaned all of this. As you can see, I've put new main jets in and I've put new pilot jets in, and I've replaced the needle jets and the jet needle, float needle. I'm not used to doing the Viragos because we basically specialise in intruders, which we've done absolutely hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of, but it's basically the same except for this strange way of setting the float height. I really don't understand why the manufacturers don't just give you a set float height, which is what they do in almost all other cases. This seems a strange way to do it, but it is what it is. Like I said, with that 19mm datum, starting with 19mm, I think you're going to be pretty close to where it needs to be. I'm not going to, if it's plus or minus 1mm, I'm not going to take them apart again. I'm going to leave it at that. Obviously, you know, it's only ever going to be exactly right when the bike is sat up absolutely balanced. I'm putting this part back together because I can hold it in the vise then at the angle at which the barrels are at 45 degrees, so if I sit these so that they're absolutely, the two are level in the middle, then that's going to be pretty much how they'll be on the bike. And I've set up my little rig here with fuel to run into them, so this makes life easier. That's the hole punch I was talking about. If you put the hole punch in the vise and then you sit the carburetors onto the hole punch with the pin on the head side resting on the hole in the pin in the punch, you can, it just supports the carburetor, because obviously those two flanges on the carburetor that hold the float pin, potentially you could snap them if you weren't careful, and then that's it, you've destroyed a carburetor. So that's just a cautionary tale. Right, so we get those sitting at the angle they would be on the bike, which is about there. Yep, that's about it. One plastic tube on. the two carbs aren't joined, so you've got to basically do them separately. So there we go, petrol on. I'll give it a minute and it should fill up. Like I said in the beginning, it's important that you put O-rings on these, otherwise you'll get false readings because they'll let air in and the level will just keep rising. It's important to stress the need to put O-rings on these drain screws, on the outside of the drain screw, not on the inside. The reason for that is if you undo the drain screw, it will allow a small amount of fuel to leak out, and when the small amount of fuel leaks out, the jet will open and the levels will be all over the place. You won't get an accurate reading. So make sure you put an O-ring on the outside of those drain screws before you start doing the process. I'd say that's close enough.
Confession time. When I put the carbs back on the bike smoked outrageously and really didn't run very well at all. So I took the carbs off again, and on closer examination realised that the throttle slide needles had also been attacked by the ethanol fuel and were badly pitted. So I bought carb repair kits from Brooks Barn, and when they turned up, fitted them along with new throttle slide needles. Did the same procedure again, the same way as I'm showing here, and put it back together. It runs absolutely perfectly now.
Just when you finish, just screw the screw back in and the O-ring will pop off. Move around to the other one. So I'm going to leave that one alone. He's a little bit low, but I'm going to leave it like that. I'm happy with that. Okay, angle's about right. And here we go. Give him a minute to fill up. I'm happy with that. That is fine. Leave it for just a minute just to make sure it doesn't get a bit excited and start to overflow.
Bloody lovely. That's a wrap then.